Today, children are exposed to much information and come away with little knowledge. Why? Because they have never thought the writer's ideas through and made them their own. This is the process of narration. What is narration? Narration is telling back a story. Kids do this naturally with their day. They tell you what happened at the park. They retell a story that was told to them. Narration isn't just memorizing something, but the act of narrating helps you to remember better. The attention required to narrate builds and exercises your brain. The process of ordering the events that you just heard and determining which of those events is worthy to retell, and the communication of telling it back, all use a different part of your brain. I made several videos. One of them is called How to Make Your Kids Smart, what to do to make your kids smarter, and narration is a part of that. Also, I referenced narration when I made a video called How to Retain Information. If you're anything like me, you blow through books, like you just eat them up, and then you hardly remember a thing. When I first started implementing narration with my son, I remember trying it myself, and it is hard. I read a page in a book called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and I read it the same month that I started school with my son, who's age 6. And I remember sitting outside in the gazebo, reading the page, and then closing my eyes and trying to recall what I just read. And I was so surprised at how difficult it was for me to do this. It is hard work, and that's a good sign because it's exercising your mind. It's strengthening those connections. A lot of public schools, and even now in homeschools, parents are using multiple choice tests and worksheets, true and false, fill in the blank. And we're working so hard to get our children to remember little tidbits of information that they can't even piece together into a whole story, which is why it's important to narrate, and what you have them narrate from is also important. I've touched on this in my What a Day in the Life of a Homeschool Mom Looks Like video, which I will also link in the description, and I talked about living books. Living books are written in story form. Instead of reading a sheet about facts about the ocean, you're reading a story, and they give the crab a name, and you learn what kind of crab it is. And it has a story about the crab roaming around in the coral reef. And when the child comes away from this beautiful story, it's been printed in their heart. And especially then when they narrate it back to you, they have to think about what they just heard. So they listened to this story. It was exciting for them. They imagined it in their mind's eye. And they learned about the coral reef, and they learned that there's salt in the ocean. They learned all of these things by listening to a beautiful story that captivated them. So narrating from living books is the bulk of what I do here in my homeschool. A large reason why it's so easy for me to homeschool is because this type of education is pretty hands-off for the parent. In my house, we don't just choose random books to narrate from. They are living books, and they are written by great minds. And the idea is to step back and let your child meet with that great mind. I'm not going to retell my child something that Mark Twain has written because my mind isn't Mark Twain's. And the beauty that is Mark Twain's mind and all of these great ideas he had would be watered down if I just regurgitated them to my son. So I read the story to my son, and he gets to meet with that great mind. And my child's mind is made to create connections and ideas in his own way because he is his own separate person. So getting him connected with these great minds directly and stepping back myself will allow his mind to grow. So then, how do you narrate? You begin at age 6, sometimes even age 7. It just depends on the cognitive ability of your child. And you start very small. It's a process. One single narration is not going to be telling of much, but multiple narrations over the course of a year will prove to be fruitful. Now, when you first start narration, and I will get into narration for kids that have never narrated before, say they're age 10 and they're in school and you've never heard of this concept, it's not too late. In fact, the book Know and Tell that I keep talking about in all of my videos will tell you how to go about teaching your child to narrate. The entire book, just go read that. You can just click off this video and end it now and go read that book because it's got great information about all aspects of narration. For my son, we started narrating back in the fall when he turned 6, and I would model narration for him. So I would read the page of a book, and then I would say, what I'm going to ask you to do in this house for school is tell me back what you heard. This is called narration. Now for my son in particular, he's very curious and he likes to know the why. And he's like, why would I tell you back something we just read together? I just heard it. And I have no problem explaining to him the why. And so I told him, it's building your brain connections, and it's going to be hard to do because your brain is getting stronger. It helps you to retain the information that you've read and make it your own. And then you form these ideas and connections in your mind, all of these ideas from all of these great minds, and you put it together in your great mind, and thus you've got knowledge. So when I explained it to him this way, he was satisfied with that, and he tried to narrate back, but it proved very difficult to do. So be prepared for your first year of narration to be more like practice. And for some children, it takes 2 years to really hone in on the skill of narration. Try it yourself, and you will see that it is very difficult to do. So I modeled narration for the first couple months with my son, and I wouldn't narrate everything. You don't narrate everything, but you don't tell them whether or not you're going to expect a narration. That way you would know that they're paying attention. And there's also some caveats to that about forming the habit of attention. And part of that is reading it and not reading it twice. So if they missed out on something, too bad. This encourages them to pay attention the first time. So they will be listening to you read to them with the expectation they could possibly narrate, though you will not narrate every single time. There are some different approaches to doing this. Some people have a jar, and then the child gets to pull out this was a free read, and I don't have to narrate today, or narrate by painting a picture, or narrate, tell me something. There's different prompts that you would use in this jar to help the child to narrate, and I will do some examples of prompts at the end of this video. But at age 6, they probably, especially if you've not read to them much, they probably have a difficult time understanding an entire page. So I would model for them what narration looked like. I would just summarize what I read, and we did that for quite a while. And then I would read one paragraph, and then I had to read very slowly. I realized soon that I was reading too quickly, and he wasn't catching all of what I was saying. Aesop's fables are great to start with when narrating with a 6-year-old. They're very short. There's usually a moral, and the child can tell back what they heard, and it's just practice. So start with Aesop's fables. You could Google it. There's tons online just for free. Just read an Aesop's fable and have your kid try to tell you what it was you just said. So I'm not reading, especially to a 6-year-old, for 20 minutes, 45 minutes at a time. Some people do, but for me, I'm reading 5 minutes, 7 minutes. Sometimes we have multiple narrations within that 7 minutes because I can't still, even he's still age 6, read for 7 minutes straight and expect him to catch a lot of that. So I have to break it up into paragraphs. So remember, narration is a process. It's not going to look amazing the first few times you did it. It's more a collection of the narrations that creates the knowledge and connections in your child's mind. It develops their imagination and helps them to grow. They will retain these things, and they will produce their own ideas, and it will be amazing to see the connections they made. And that's why we also, if you watch the video I made about how we homeschool, why I read from multiple different books at a time. And if you're schooling multiple children, narration is going to look different from all of them. So don't get down on somebody for not narrating the same way as another child. Some kids are more chatty, some are more well-spoken. Sometimes my kid gets bored and he will embellish the story with things that didn't happen, and I won't say, that's not right, that didn't happen. I will say, interesting, I don't remember that happening. It's more important to not dampen their spirits than it is to correct them. In fact, during their narration, even written or oral, you don't correct grammar, you don't interrupt them. And about interruption, I did a video called what I do to prepare for a homeschool day, and I talk about why I pre-read. And pre-reading is basically me taking the book that I'm going to read to my son. I plan on narrating it with him, and I look through it and think and pull out all of the different words he may not know, not every single word, things that I think that he'd ask me about during the reading. And you know your son best, which is why it's so cool to homeschool, because you can kind of prepare for these instances. I will write them on the board or even on a scrap piece of paper, and we'll talk about them before I read to him the narration. I will give him what's called a captain idea, which is basically a quick one-liner about the book. We're going to read a book about a bunny who lives in a forest, and then the forest will, let's say the forest is in somewhere in California. So then I will pull up a map and I will show him all these things. This is where the bunny's going to be in California, and I will have all of this information written down so that there's no interruptions during the reading from him being like, where's that? What's that mean? And there's no interruptions during the narration. There's going to be prompts at the end when he's done narrating back to you. There will be prompts that you can use to produce further discussion, which is important as well. But it's important not to interrupt the process. So that was the don'ts. Do model for the child, be patient with the child, do short paragraphs if necessary, read slowly, use a captain idea, pre-read so that you can prepare for questions that could interrupt the lesson. There is no multiple choice test that will stay in the mind of a child like a beautiful book, chewed on and retold like narration. A famous quote that Charlotte Mason always used, what a child digs for becomes their own possession. So when you fill their mind with all of these ideas from all of these great minds and they think about it, retell it to you, they dig for it, they think, they remember, they hold it dear in their heart, and they've dug for it. And what they dig for becomes their own possession. And that becomes the source of a brilliant idea they may have for whatever God's purpose is for their life. Narrations will soon for us become written, but right now they are just an oral retelling. For older children, it is written. You can have them draw. Daddy's here? Okay, I'm coming. Well, though it's windy, baby. I don't want that door opened. My children like to draw when I read poetry. It can be, one time when we were reading about certain tribes, it got confusing because there was more than one tribe and there was a war. So I just used objects to sort of signify the different tribes, and he would move them around where they would go, and that was his version of narrating. He was showing me what was happening with the objects that we were using. Narration is important because it helps you retain what you've just read, and it's important to read from good living books written by great minds so that your child is directly connected with the source so that they can create their own ideas, because God has a really amazing plan for your child if you just allow that to happen. All right? I'm going to close by saying sometimes during narration, I would ask my son to narrate back and he could hardly tell me a thing. Then when my husband would come home from work, my son would just tell him all sorts of stuff about the story. And I'm like, wow, he heard all of that, because when I asked him for a narration immediately after, he didn't give me much. But several hours went by and he must have been processing and thinking about it throughout the day, because he was able to give this beautiful narration to my husband. And that sets me on a topic for my next video, which will be about reflection and ruminating and allowing an idea to process in your mind. And I will tell you how to do that and why that's important in my next video. And for now, if you have questions about narration, read the book Know and Tell, or leave comments and ask me here, and I will try my best to help you. All right? Have a nice day.